Hey, how's it going? My name is Gabby. Welcome back to my channel. Today we're going to be doing my February wrap-up. And in the month of February, I read a lot of things. I read 37 books total, 24 manga, and then I read 13 novels. If you missed it earlier this month, I was working on a video where I read 24 manga within 24 hours. It was a really fun time. I'll have it linked down below if you missed it. But because of that, my numbers this month are just outrageous. I was reading almost every single day of February. Like, February was a really great reading month for me. I worked on a number of reading vlogs this month, including the 24 manga in 24 hour video that I mentioned. I also very recently at the end of February, I did another round of like a thriller horror kind of reading vlog. Earlier this month, I worked on a Stick Season reading vlog. I did reading books for fans of Stick Season or Noah Khan, and that was a really fun video that I worked on. And then I also did a romance reading vlog for Valentine's Day, which was really fun because I haven't done an entire reading vlog dedicated to romance in quite some time, so I had a good time with that. And if you missed it, over on my Patreon this month, I actually did an extended romance reading vlog where I read an additional book just for that video. I read Butcher and Blackbird just for that video. And then I also made a Patreon exclusive video this month that was tier ranking different thriller tropes, which I also had a really fun time working on that video. So if you would like to see either of those, I will have those linked down below. This month I did end up having a couple different DNFs. One of the books I actually DNF'd for the second time was Spells for Forgetting. I feel like this is a book that I keep trying to convince myself that it'll be my thing, and then it just ends up not really being my thing, and I get really bored with this. But this book is one that I was trying to read again for the Stick Season vlog because this book gets recommended a ton for fans of Stick Season. So I really wanted to include it in that video, but unfortunately I tried to read this again. I actually DNF'd this last year for a different video that I was doing, and I don't know why. This book just isn't my thing, and I just have to accept that. And then I also ended up DNFing the Fiancé Farce. I probably only got maybe 90 to 100 pages into this one before I decided to DNF. And I'm so upset about this one because I have loved so many books from this author before, and I really wanted to be obsessed with this, but I don't know why. There was something about the writing in this that just felt so insta-love. I just couldn't really connect with the characters. And then the third book that I DNF'd this month was The Night of the Storm, and this is another one that I'm really sad about. I actually got 50% of the way through this before I decided to DNF it. This is one that I was really intrigued by because we're following a family who's living in Texas, and there's like the threat of this hurricane that is becoming more and more catastrophic. But really, like, I don't know, I found this story to be so boring. It was a lot more about like the family drama when I just wanted the stakes to feel like so much higher than they did. And even the murder mystery elements of the story, like, I just didn't care. Like, I could not get invested in this to save my life, so unfortunately it was a DNF. So jumping into the 37 things that I read this month, I figured I would start with the manga because I read 24 manga this month. Because I read all of these manga for a specific video, I'm not gonna take time to like explain my reviews. I'm just gonna hold up the manga and what I rated it. I want to go in order from my favorite manga for that video to my least favorite. But if you would like to see more of my in-depth thoughts for any of these manga, then I highly encourage you to check out that video because I go a lot more into my thoughts in that video. Yeah, I think my favorite manga that I read for that entire video was the Yakuza's Bias. I gave this 5 stars, and I highly recommend it. If you're a K-pop fan, you need to read this. I think my second favorite was The Promised Neverland. This was 5 stars for me. I cannot wait to continue in this series. And then in third place, I think I have Real Account. This was 5 stars for me. I love this so much. If you're a fan of either Squid Game or Black Mirror, I highly recommend. And then I think I have Summertime Rendering. This one totally took me off guard. It's horror, it's mystery thriller, it's creepy, it's island vibes. I love this so much. Like, I loved everything about this. I can't wait to continue in the series. And then I Hear the Sunspot was probably my favorite like boys love manga that I read for that whole video, and this is another one that I can't wait to continue with the series. And then same goes for Happiness Volume 1. This one's about vampires, and it's from the same manga author as Blood on the Tracks, which is also my next favorite from that video. I read Blood on the Tracks Volume 15. This one was 5 stars. This one was 5 stars. They were both so good. And then I read My Summer Review Volume 3. This one was like about 4.5 stars. Really enjoyed this one. This one's boys love manga as well. And then I read Erased. Erased is one that completely took me off guard with how much I loved it. This one's more on the thicker side, but it does have some like mystery thriller and like even time travel elements to it that I really loved. I gave this 4.5 stars. And then I read A Home Far Away. This is a boys love manga that I gave 4 stars. And then same with Love Nest. This is another boys love that I gave 4 stars. And then we have Alice in Borderland Volume 6. This is one that I ended up giving 4 stars. I love the series so freaking much. I can't recommend Alice in Borderland enough. Next up was Ascendance of a Bookworm. This one was really cute. I gave this one 4 stars. And then we have Parasite Volume 1. This one was really cool. It involved like an alien parasite. It was a little bit more funny though than I was anticipating. I just wanted it to be a little bit creepier. And I gave this one 3.5 stars. And then we have Killing Stalking Volume 3, which I also gave 3.5 stars. I'm not totally sure how I feel about this one compared to the first 2 volumes. I didn't love it as much. And then we have What He Who Doesn't Believe in Fate Says Volume 1, I gave this one 3.5 stars, and then Fly Me to the Moon Volume 1, I gave this one around 3 stars. Like, this one was okay. And then we have On or Off Volume 1. This is another one that I ended up giving 3 stars. This one's a boys love romance where like they're working in an office together. And then we have The Summer You Were There, which was one of the only girl romance books that I read, but unfortunately this one was about 2 stars for me. I just didn't care for this one too much. And then we also had Hyperventilation, which this one was also about 2 stars. I just didn't really care for this one. Then we have Send Them a Farewell Gift for the Last Time. This one's another boys love manga that I ended up giving 2 stars. Didn't really care for this one. And unfortunately, Death Note Volume 3, I also ended up giving 2 stars. Really didn't care for this one. I already had Return It to the Library, but Chainsaw Man Volume 1 was another one that I read for this video that I really didn't enjoy. I gave that one 2 stars. And then the only 1 star that I had for the whole video was New York, New York, which is really unfortunate because this is one that I really had high hopes for that I thought I could love, but this was the first ever manga that I've ever given 1 star. Like, how tragic is that? So if you want to see my reasoning behind any of these ratings, again, I'll have that manga video linked down below if you want to check it out. It's a fun time. I think that manga video was really cool because I had a little spin the wheel, decide which order that I read them in, so it was kind of like fun because I didn't know what I was going to be reading next. Alright, so the first books that I read in the month of February were all for the video I was doing for reading books for fans of Stick Season or fans of Noah Kahn. And the first book that I read for that video was Once There Were Wolves. Holy shit, this was an instant new favorite when I read it, and I'm so glad that I read it for that video because I don't know if this is something I ever would have picked up. I mean, clearly, this has been sitting on my bookshelf since 2021. Like, I had no urgent reason to pick this book up anytime soon, but I'm so glad that I ended up reading this because I loved it so freaking much for so many different reasons. This one is kind of like one of those literary fiction style of writing books that has just a little bit of like mystery kind of thriller elements in there. And the main focus of the story is that we're following these 2 sisters. We have our main character named Inti, and her sister are going to be moving to Scotland because they are going to be with like this team of biologists who are going to help reintroduce wolves into their society. But like the locals in Scotland, like they don't really like the idea of like the wolves coming back into their society because of a lot of different reasons, but mainly because like they're afraid that it's going to kill their animals and that the wolves might be like violent. And there's like a whole lot of things, but like that's the main premise of the book, is that there's these wolves that are going to be coming into their society, and then there's a murder and people don't know, like, was the murder because of one of the wolves or was it a human who like killed another human and they're trying to blame it on the wolves. And so there definitely is that like, you know, mystery thriller element to this story. I just loved this so much. Like, I loved the writing in this book. I loved the way that it talked about violence and the way that violence can look so different between like humans and wild animals, and just the way this book was written in general. Like, I loved the family bond between these 2 sisters. Like, not only were the sisters' relationship like with each other really well fleshed out and really interesting, but also like the relationship that they had with their parents growing up, you know, because we get a lot of flashbacks to like their childhood and growing up and how their parents just really wanted to raise them to like prepare them for the violence of the world. It was really interesting. It was really well done. I feel like every single character in this book was so fleshed out and so interesting. All of it was just really so well done. The writing moved me to tears a few times during the ending. Like, I wasn't expecting to get as attached to these characters as I did. I just think it's wild because this book is on the shorter side, you know, it's less than 300 pages. It's about 250 pages. And the fact that I was able to feel so much in those 250 pages is absolutely wild to me. But I love this so much. Like, this was a 5 stars. This was even like, if I could give this 6 out of 5 stars, like I would, you know, like that's how much I love this. I think this really appeals to my like love of nature in a way too. Like, this just made me want to hop on a plane and like go to Scotland right now. The way that it was describing the nature and the snow, and it was so atmospheric. It was so beautiful, and I love this. Like, I will be reading every single thing this author comes out with in the future because of how much I love this. And then ironically enough, for that same video, I ended up reading Migrations, which is also another book from the same author, and I believe that Migrations was actually the first book that this author published, and then this one was the follow-up a few years later. But Migrations is another story that kind of follows this woman in the wilderness. So in this story, we're following this woman named Franny, and she's gonna be going to Greenland, and she's only going there with one goal in mind, and that is that she wants to follow these specific birds and watch their last, what might be their last migration. And so the whole purpose of this book is that she's trying to find like a boating crew who will like help take her so she can track their last migration. And this one also takes place in like a near futuristic world where climate change has like severely impacted the planet, and like a lot of species are going completely extinct. This one, unfortunately for me, like I didn't connect with this one personally as much as I connected with this author's other book. Like I can't help myself but compare these two books because they're both so similar, you know, because they're both following these women in nature, and it has really beautiful writing in both of these stories. But I personally connected a lot more with the characters and the story that was going on in this one, whereas with this one was slightly less interesting to me because this one reads a lot more like literary fiction, and if anything, I think the most like mysterious thing happening is you trying to figure out this main character and like her past. You know, like this character has clearly gone through some shit, and this character has experienced some trauma, and so you're kind of trying to figure out throughout the story like what exactly it is that happened in her past, and that's like the biggest mysterious element to this story. I still thought that this book was really gorgeously written. I think this author has such a beautiful way with words. I just didn't connect with this one as much as I was hoping to, so I think I'm giving this one around a 3-star. I thought this one was just okay, but I still stand by the fact that I will be reading anything that this author comes out with in the future because I was so impressed with this one. And then for that video, I also ended up reading the book A Man Called Uva, which is such a popular book. This is one that has been a popular book for such a long time, and I never got around to reading it because I was never sure if it was going to be my thing or not. And in this story, we're just following this elderly man named Uva, but you know what's weird is the fact that he reads like he's so elderly, like he's so old. And in the story, it said he was like 59 or something. And I was like, 59? I'm sorry, but 59 is so fucking young. Like 59 is so young. Even like 69 would still be like pretty young. Like he literally reads like he's in his 80s. And so this man, Uva, he's dealing with a lot because his wife has recently passed away, and he's starting to wonder if there is a reason left on this earth for him to live. And so this book is very depressing and bleak in a way. There's a lot of talk about suicide in this book, which was not easy, but then it's also about how he starts to develop this really unlikely friendship with his young neighbors. And I don't know why I feel so heartless when I say that I just didn't really connect with this book. I know this book means a lot to so many people, and if you emotionally connected with this book, then I think that's so awesome for you, and I really wish that I felt the same, because for me, he's like one of those like grumpy old men who is just so judgmental of everything and everyone, and it's just like he's always in a bad mood like 24/7. Like he was just a hard protagonist for me to follow, you know? And even though I did end up enjoying the unlikely friendship that he starts to form with his neighbors, I just still never fully connected with the story, and it never moved me to tears. It never made me emotional the way that I thought that it could. I also feel like we got a lot of flashbacks in this book with him and his wife when they were younger. We get to know about their story more, but I also feel like those flashbacks just lacked the depth that I was really looking for. Like it just felt like, I don't know, the writing felt so cliche at times, you know, because he would just be like, oh, she was the most beautiful woman that I'd ever seen, but there was just nothing like more to it, you know? Like I don't know, maybe it's just me. I just felt like I needed more from this. I ended up giving this one 3 stars, and then I ended up reading Annie Bot. I actually listened to this one on audio thanks to Libro. Dude, this book was absolutely fascinating. This one's kind of like a sci-fi story. So in this story, we follow a very unique perspective because we're following from the perspective of this AI robot named Annie, and she was basically made to be like this sex robot for this guy, Doug. And so we follow from her perspective, you know, throughout this entire book, and this book brings so many thought-provoking questions to the table, like what makes us human. It was just so fascinating to see Annie's character like learn and grow throughout the course of the story. I also just really appreciated the very like subtle feminist messages that existed within these pages. I also just really loved, you know, learning more about this world, and they have a lot of these AI robots that they call Stellas like in this universe, but Annie herself, like our protagonist that we're following, she's like one of the more advanced AIs. Like they really want to study her specifically. You know, it's so wild to say because I never say this about books, but I really do wish this one was longer because this book is only about like 240 pages. I feel like the audiobook was only about 6 to 8 hours. I really was interested in reading more about this universe. I wanted to know more about these characters. Like I would have loved this book to be even longer. I mean, my hope is that maybe this author will like turn this into a book series maybe, or that she'll write another book that takes place in the same universe, and like you would bet your ass I will read that because I'm so fascinated with this concept. I think it's really interesting, and I love this. I gave this one 4 stars, but honestly, like I've been thinking about it almost every single day since I read it earlier this month. So I really enjoyed this one. Highly recommend Annie Bot. I thought the audiobook was fantastic, by the way. And then the next book that I read was The Breakup Tour. This is a romance book that I was highly looking forward to because this one keeps marketing itself as like, this one's for the Swifties. And like, if you're a fan of Taylor Swift, you'll probably love this. And you know, I am a huge fan of Taylor Swift. I've been a fan of Taylor Swift for 15 years, for basically my whole life. Like, I think I am the target audience for this kind of book. But unfortunately, this one was a huge miss for me. Like, I really did not like this. In this story, we're following this girl named Riley, who is essentially Taylor Swift, okay? She's like a singer, songwriter, pop star, like country star turned pop star overnight. It's basically like the story of Taylor Swift's career, except for the fact that Riley has recently gotten married and then divorced within a span of like 6 months or something, and now this guy that she's divorcing is claiming that he like was the one that inspired a lot of her big hits, when in reality it was this guy named Max that she went to college with. And so now it's about how she's going to this guy Max that she used to date, and she's like, hey, can you tell the world that these songs are actually about you? Which is also kind of like weird to do. Like, I don't know why she would do that. But then he's like, sure, but the only way that I'll do that is if you let me join you on your tour. So she's going on this huge tour, right? It's like the Breakup Tour, which is basically like the Eras Tour, or like it wants to be like that. I just did not care for this. I don't know why I thought I would love this so much, because in hindsight, like, I don't usually like second chance romances, but I also just thought because this was pitched as like a book that's for the Swifties, I really thought this could be something that I would love. But no, I feel like in this story, not only did these two characters have zero fucking chemistry, like it was so boring to read this because they had no chemistry, but it was also like the way that it was written was just so cheesy. It was like they would try to incorporate music into like the sex scenes or something. Like it would say like, she touched me like she touched the piano keys on her stage, or like some bullshit like that, where it's just like, oh my god, ew, ick. It's so cheesy. But then also like I couldn't really stand Riley as a protagonist. I felt like sometimes she came off so like snobby and like narcissistic, and I just feel like they completely missed the point for like why Taylor Swift is as successful as she is. Like, she's more than just a singer-songwriter, okay? This character just felt so shallow. She just felt like a copycat, like wannabe Taylor Swift. So I gave this one 2 stars. It was not great. And then I ended up reading On the Same Page by Haley Cass, and this one is a female romance that I read for the romance reading vlog that I was working on this month. And in this story, we're following these 2 characters named Riley and Gianna. And so Riley's character is somebody who works at the Boston news station, which, oh my gosh, love. I've talked about this so many times, how I love following a character who works at a news station. I think that's so fun. And then Gianna is actually an influencer. She's like a one-woman business, which like I could relate to a little bit in a ways. You know, as a content creator full-time, I could definitely connect with some of the things that she was talking about. What I really like about this book though is that these 2 women have been best friends for like 10 years, right? But then we do get flashback chapters in between the chapters of the present day 10 years ago to when they met when they were in college, and they were actually roommates when they were in college. But the best thing about the roommates thing is that they didn't really like each other when they were in college, and one of them was definitely giving like Mean Girls energy. But I loved that about this book because I loved that we got to see how they met. We got to see the very early stages of their relationship and how they didn't really get along at first, but how they eventually grew on each other and became closer. And I don't usually like the friends to lovers trope, like I really don't, but apparently if you make it gay, I like anything. Like apparently any trope but make it gay, I like it. This one, oh my gosh, this was 5 stars. I think I can confidently say that this is like my favorite female romance that I've ever freaking read in my life. Like I loved this. I would give it all for these 2. Like I love them together. They're so fucking cute. I feel like I saw a lot of myself in both of these characters, and I really just connected to both of them for different reasons. I just also like, oh my gosh, the steamy scenes in this book were written so well, but it was such a slow burn at the same time because this book is over 450 pages, but I don't care if a romance is long as it's written like a really well slow burn. Like I want these characters pining for each other for such a long time, and this just did everything for me. Like this is everything that I'm looking for in a romance. All right, and then next up I read The Partner Plot by Christina Forrest, and this one is another romance where we're following these 2 high school sweethearts who are going to be reuniting again in the future. And I know you're probably sitting there wondering like, why did you even pick up this book? Because I just talked about how I don't really like second chance, I don't like friends to lovers. The reason why I picked up this book is because I loved this other romance book from this author called The Neighbor Favor that came out last year. Like I loved that one. And so I was really looking forward to anything that this author came out with in the future. We're following these 2 characters in this book named Violet and Xavier. They were both together when they were in high school, but now it's been like 10 years or something like that, and they haven't seen each other since high school. And now she's working as a successful celebrity stylist while he's working at the high school. He's like working as like a basketball coach, even though he always wanted to eventually be a basketball player, but because of an injury, he wasn't able to make it there. But anyways, they somehow reunite and see each other again in Vegas because they're both in Vegas for different reasons. And then they spend the night together in Vegas only to discover the next day that they accidentally got married, and then they're like, oh shit. So this book definitely has that like marriage of convenience trope, because then they decide to act like they're married because it would be more convenient for their lives. And so that was the main thing that I ended up enjoying a lot about this book, because I do love the marriage of convenience trope. Like I'm here for that. I think that's a really fun time. I think overall though, I'm probably giving this book around a 3 star because there were some things that I really enjoyed about this book, and then some things that I just like didn't care for too much. I mean, gosh, in the first like 100 to 150 pages, I was almost considering DNFing this book, because not only because at the beginning it had a lot of tropes that I really didn't care for, but I was struggling to feel the chemistry between these two at all. But then as the book went on, I definitely connected more with both of them as characters, especially Xavier. He just felt like a very, you know, well fleshed out character, and I really did connect with him a lot in the end. But I also just still felt like this book needed more angst or something, you know? Like, I still feel like the chemistry between them could have been stronger. I did really like both of them as individual characters, and I especially loved Violet's relationship that she had with her sisters in this book. But overall, I'm probably still gonna end up giving this one 3 stars, but I still would continue in the series if we get another book from one of her sisters' perspective. I probably would still read that in the future. And then the next book that I ended up reading this month was actually Butcher and Blackbird. This was the final book that I read for that romance reading vlog, but I only read this one for the Patreon exclusive part. And unfortunately, yeah, this book was not for me. It was not for me. And I ended up giving this book 1 star, and I'm so sorry about it, but I'm actually really not. So if you love this book, I'm so sorry. Maybe skip ahead a little bit because I don't want to yuck anybody else's yum. Like, I really don't. If you love this book, I'm so happy for you, but this was really not my cup of tea, and I don't really understand why this book is as popular as it is, to be honest. In this book, the whole appeal of this book, right, is that we're following these 2 serial killers, this guy and this girl, who are both serial killers, and they fall in love with each other. It's kind of funny, you know, because at the beginning, they're both like, they meet each other, and they're both kind of like fangirling over the fact that they've met this other serial killer who like they look up to and they admire so much, and they're like fangirling over each other. And I was just kind of like, okay, like this is kind of silly, but like I don't care, like I'm here for it, whatever. But then it's not so much the dark, you know, romance or like the dark comedy in this book that bothered me, because like I was kind of interested in the fact that they were both serial killers. I thought that was kind of interesting. But then it was like the writing and the characters themselves that made me despise this book as much as I did. Like, oh my gosh, you might think like, oh, but you tabbed it so much, like how could you not enjoy it? And no, the answer is because I was tabbing it every time this girl Violet looks at Rowan and she goes, "You're the worst." And she says it like literally a million times, because I guess that's this author's way of like showing that she's flirting with him, is "you're the worst," over and over and over again. Like, I'm not even kidding. That's like one of the only phrases that this character knows how to say, I guess. She also has this habit of calling him pretty boy, which like, I'm sorry, ick. That is like the biggest ick for me. I hate it. I don't know how to explain why I hate it. I just do. I also was very annoyed at the fact that they call each other the nicknames of like Butcher and Blackbird like constantly. I'm like, dude, nicknames are supposed to be cute when they're used like sparingly, you know, like every now and then. Like, I don't need you beating me over the head with this nickname of Butcher or Blackbird. And I also don't know why these characters were written as if they're like 13 years old or something. Literally a scene where they're like sharing a bottle of something and he's like, "Did you get your girl cooties on it?" And she's like, "Why are you worried about that? Like, I'm not worried about your man cooties." And I'm like, cooties? Like, what are we fucking talking about here? Like, this is so weird. You think something like this would be a little bit more interesting because there's supposed to be all these like dark romantic elements. And even the dark and romantic elements were so few and far between. Like, the scenes where they were actually like being serial killers was so rare to see. Like, it rarely ever happened. It was mostly just this like pining over each other that I didn't care about, trying to make each other jealous that I didn't care about. And then by the time we actually do get to the sex scenes, like, oh my gosh, they're so like cringy, eye roll worthy. Like, I'm sorry, but I can't. And they're also like 20 to 30 pages long of just like constant sex scenes. Like, it's just not for me. This is not my thing. It was 1 star. I'm so sorry. All right, and then the next thing that I read was Your Shadow Half Remains. This one is a horror novella that I've been very interested in reading. I actually listened to this one on audio, and this is a book that I was really excited for because this book described itself as The Last of Us meets Bird Box, because in this story we're following this character named Riley who's living in this like apocalyptic world where you can no longer like look other people in the eyes or else it will make you like go crazy and try to kill them, which like, yeah, very Bird Box, right? It feels like the same kind of premise as Bird Box, but then things start to change for Riley when there's this new neighbor named Ellis who moves in down the street, and as they start to grow a friendship, she feels more strongly than ever that like she really wants to look at this other person, because like every time her and Ellis are communicating, she'll still be wearing like a blindfold or like something over her face where like they haven't seen each other, right? And so this book was so interesting. It was very much like Bird Box to me in the way that we only knew a little bit about this world and the universe and the way that it works because we're following a protagonist who's just kind of like figuring it out as she goes. But it's also like, as the reader, in a way, like you also feel blindfolded because you only have limited information about things. With this one, oh my gosh, this was like kind of the biggest bummer of all time that I had to give this book 3 stars, because I really feel like this one had the potential to be a new favorite of mine, but there were just a few things about this book that didn't really work for me. I mean, even though I loved the writing, like I absolutely loved the writing in this, like eat that shit up, I also feel like there were just a few kind of like like glaring plot holes in this book for me. I also feel like the ending for me was a little bit weak. It was a little bit underwhelming. Like I just wanted a little bit more from that ending. And I know I never say this either, but this book felt too short. I feel like I could have had an additional like 100 pages added to this book and I would not have been mad about it. Like I wanted to know more about the universe. I don't know, it just ended up feeling a little bit unsatisfying. I don't feel like this kind of book is gonna be a huge crowd pleaser. I don't know, I'm giving this one 3 stars. I just wanted so much more. And then I ended up reading The Reformatory by Tananarive. This was actually my BookTube book club pick for the month of February, and I'm so excited that this ended up being my BookTube pick because this is the longest book that I've ever had for my book club at 550 pages. I'm so glad that this ended up being a book club pick for this month because I ended up really loving this one. At this moment in time, I'm still torn over my rating of whether I want to give this like a 4-star, 4.5, or maybe even 5 stars. Like I'm still sitting somewhere in that range, but I loved this so much. And this is a horror story where we're following this young boy named Robbie, and this boy Robbie, he's getting sentenced to 6 months at this place called the Reformatory. That's basically like, it's like a boys' school, but it functions as more of like a jail than anything. And so we not only follow Robbie's perspective, but then we also follow his sister's perspective, Gloria, as she's like trying to get him out of this reformatory. The unique thing about Robbie is the fact that he can actually see ghosts, and so that's kind of where some of like the paranormal horror elements of the story really start to come in. This book is one that I did struggle to rate a little bit just because I found the beginning of this book to be pretty slow. Like I think the first 200 pages, even up to like 250 pages, I was like, okay, this is really slow. Like it's taking me a long time to get invested. I mean, I love Tananarive. I love the way that she writes her characters. Like I immediately felt connected to these characters. It was just the plot that I found to be very slow moving. It was like there was not a lot happening in the story for me until about 250 pages in, and then things really picked up from there and I flew through the second half of this book so fast. But I do think that this author is such an incredible writer. Like I really do think she has such a brilliant way with words and the way that she fleshes out her characters. Like they just all feel so real. And I also just really got emotionally invested. Like by the ending, I was nearly moved to tears a few times just because the writing was so solid. And so I'm so glad that this ended up being a book club pick because I really do think this was a great one. I've already had so many people messaging me saying that they would never have picked this one up on their own because of how long it is, but they read it for the book club and they ended up really loving it, and like that makes my heart so happy. Like that is always the goal with the book club, right? I just love hearing that. So I'm really glad that this one ended up being such a huge success, and if you missed the live show, I'll have it linked down below. And then I also ended up reading The Resort for that same reading vlog, and this one is a new thriller. This one was recently just a book of the month pick, and in this story we're following this protagonist named Cass. She has this like dark and mysterious past that like, we don't know about as the reader, but now it's like a few years later and she's working as like a dive instructor in Thailand. And then we're also following from the perspective of this girl named Brooke, who is like this TikTok influencer girl who's also in Thailand, and she also happens to have like a dark and mysterious past. So like, not gonna lie, the two girls with the dark and mysterious past kind of made this book difficult to read because they both read exactly the same to me. I think this girl, Brooke, you know, the influencer girl, was one of the most obnoxious characters that I've read in a long time because she just thinks that she's like famous and that everybody's obsessed with her. And like, it got really old reading her point of view very quickly. But you know, the thrilling elements of the story really kick off when one of the diving students is found dead and they start to believe like maybe there could be a killer among them. And that's really where like the thriller elements of the story really come in. Unfortunately, I just didn't really care for this one, not only because I didn't really connect with any of the characters, I just didn't care for like the writing very much in general. I just don't think the writing was like that good just in general, and I was never that invested in the mystery elements of this book. I also just, I was not a huge fan of the epilogue. I feel like it was this author's like last ditch effort to try and make you like feel surprised or like shocked, and I just didn't care. So this one ended up being a 2 stars for me. I personally just, I don't think this one was a win for me, even though I did like the island vibes. Like there were definitely some things about this that I liked, but for the most part it was a huge miss. And then I ended up reading Interesting Facts About Space by Emily Austen. This is actually the first book that I read from this author, even though I know she has a few other books that I think are pretty popular. But this one is kind of like a contemporary story where we're following this character named Enid, and she is a very interesting and unique character to follow because she is absolutely obsessed with true crime. She's a lesbian, she's partially deaf in one ear, and then she also has this phobia of bald men. And not only that, but she also is really comforted by like random facts talks about space. Like whenever she's starting to like spiral or when she's feeling a little bit anxious, she'll just start talking about interesting facts about space, which I personally loved because I love space. Like I love astronomy. I was really interested in learning about outer space, like especially when I was in college. So like I really loved that aspect of this story. And I just feel like Enid in general was a really interesting protagonist to follow. Like I don't know, I really connected with her on a lot of different things. And this story is really just about her navigating her dating life. You know, she's dating a few different women from these dating apps and she's trying to find her person, trying to find a connection. And then she's also like trying to develop this relationship with her like estranged half-sisters after her absent father has passed away, and she's trying to get closer to them and like make friendships with them, but she's like constantly worried that she's like a bad person or that she has like a parasite in her head. She doesn't feel normal and she feels like something's wrong with her because she doesn't know how to really communicate with other people like how she's feeling. I don't know, I thought this book was really interesting. I really liked following Enid as a protagonist, you know, because like I said, I found her to be relatable in a lot of different ways, and I just really liked the general like writing style in this book, and I ended up giving this one 4 stars. And then the last thing that I read this month was actually a non-fiction book called The Creative Act, A Way of Being. This is one that I've been seeing around the internet recently as like something that's interesting to read for people who are like creative people or for people who like need inspiration that are, you know, working creative jobs. And I was like, this could be perfect for me to read, you know, because I'm trying to read more nonfiction this year. And even though I typically don't enjoy the kind of like self-help type of nonfiction books, I was also like, well, maybe if it's something specific like creativity or like trying to inspire creativity, then maybe it would be something that I would like more. Unfortunately, this one ended up being mostly a miss for me, and I do think it's because of me. Like I just don't really care for self-help books like this. Like I don't know how to put my finger on like what I don't like about them, but I just hate the idea of like some man sitting there and being like, let me explain to you how the world works. I mean, don't get me wrong, some of it definitely worked for me. I think if anything, the quote that's right at the beginning of this book was one of my favorite parts of the whole book, and it's not even a quote from the author. It's just like a random ass quote at the beginning of the book, but it says, the object isn't to make art, it's to be in that wonderful state which makes art inevitable. Like I loved that quote to introduce myself to this book. Like I was like, okay, I'm here for that, like that's beautiful. But then I feel like a lot of this book is like what I don't know, what the kids would call Tumblr poetry, or like that could be an Instagram caption. Like it's not that deep. Like there would be some moments like this where he just like writes one little thing that's supposed to be like huge and significant on like one page. There's a time for certain ideas to arrive and they find a way to express themselves through us. Like, okay. But what really bothered me about this book is this one thing in particular that I ended up putting a tab on because I was like, I have to come back to this. Because he's trying to say that sometimes things will happen that's like a sign from the universe that applies to your current situation in life, and like you should take any signs from the universe that you can, which like I get what he's trying to say. But then his example, he says, when my appendix burst, the doctor who diagnosed it insisted that I go to the hospital immediately to have it removed. I was told there were no other options. I found myself in a nearby bookstore. Standing out on a table in front was a new book by Dr. Andrew Weil. I picked it up and let it fall open. The first passage my eyes went to said, if a doctor wants to remove a part of your body and they tell you it has no function, don't believe this. The information I needed was made available to me in that moment, and I still have my appendix. Like, I'm sorry, what? I'm sorry, I can't. You got medical advice and you thought, I'm gonna take this random ass sign from the universe instead of following medical advice and then give that advice to other people reading this book? Like, I'm sorry, I can't. So after that moment, I got really like skeptical of this and I couldn't really take it seriously after that. So I don't usually like to rate nonfiction books, but this is feeling like a very solid 2 stars for me. Alright, so those are all of the books that I read in the month of February. I know, holy shit, it was so many. So you'll have to let me know, how many books did you read in the month of February? What were your favorite books that you read this month? I would love to know if you read any of the books that I read this month. What did you think of them? I will be posting my March TBR video very soon after this. It should be my next video that goes up after this, actually. And just as a reminder, if you haven't heard, I'm gonna be hosting my first Trova trip to Italy this October. So if you're feeling like maybe you would want to travel together in the year of 2024 this October, if you've never been to Italy, maybe you can go to Italy with us. There's gonna be so many people on this trip, myself included, who have never been to Italy. And there's even a lot of people on this trip who are signed up who have never traveled internationally. So it's definitely gonna be a fun experience for all of us. My mom and my sister are both going to be going on this trip, and I could not be more excited. If you're thinking about joining the Italy trip, I will have the link down below that has all of the information, including the itinerary and what's included in the price. And just so you know, you only have to put down 25% of the overall trip price in order to confirm your spot for the trip. So you don't have to pay off all of the trip up front, you can pay it off over time. And it's really exciting. I only have 12 spots left on the trip, so if you're thinking about joining us, now would be the time to book it. Thank you so much for watching as always, and I will see you very soon with another video. Bye!